First American here to help us with the 1031. I've done these classes before with Kenny and by myself and stuff. I wanted to show you a video from a really long time ago when I was a guest host, when Tammy, my business partner today, that's how we got together as business partners. Hey buddy, we had a local show in Santa Clarita, and I'd come in every single week as part of my branding for Team Bjorkman, and I would do a segment on the TV show. One day I decided to do this segment about 1031 exchanges. I haven't watched this in probably 3 years. I don't even know what it says. But here's what I know. When people Google real estate agents that do 1031 exchanges in Santa Clarita, I pop up. We've probably sold 10, 12 houses from this video that's probably 3 or 4 years old. I don't even know how old it is. But I should do a new one and update it because I probably look like I'm 12 in it. But the reality is because I had some, not all, 1031 knowledge, I've been able to change our year's production numbers with it. So let's laugh a little bit and see what it says here.
Not yet.
Oh, now we're back.
Now we're back.
Hi.
Welcome back to SUV Today. Chaos ensues while the
Gosh,
commercial break is
you talk
going
about-
on. Well, you know, this topic with Adrian Peterson is just creating a lot of buzz even in the room here, in the studio. So, lots of questions.
Oh, you're all fired up.
because Mike Bjorkman's here. That's why we're all fired up. Is that why?
I hardly beat kids.
Okay, well there goes another clip we won't be using.
Okay, let's start it again.
Let's start it
This
over.
was a live show.
I'm Tammy Edwards, along here with Dave Caldwell. We're here with Mike Bjorkman. Mike, you wanted to talk today about 1031 exchange. And most specifically, there were 4 points you really wanted to make about it.
Wow, that's really good. You know, as continued as part of our series that we're doing, we're trying to talk about things that agents really don't like to talk about. Whether if they don't know about it, or it's kind of edgy, or it's just basically one of those, what's going on? One of those things that you know, we all want to know more information about. So today's topic I chose was 1031 exchanges. You know, and obviously I have to point out that I'm not a CPA. Anything I say, listen to, but verify with your CPA.
Is 1031 like it's an IRS government form, or?
Yeah, 1031, it refers to the IRS's code on deferring taxes. And who wouldn't want to do that? You know, one of the benefits of living in America, the government is always, I shouldn't say always, but they like to cooperate in making money with you. So, you know, you always hear the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Well, they have all these little tax codes to help you defer your taxes. So the more money you make, the more money the government makes, and it works out fantastic. So 1031 exchange, basically, that's what we want to do is defer taxes, and it's basically for an investment property. And a lot of people, they'll buy a rental property, and they'll be happy with it. They'll say, okay, I bought a condo in Valencia, and I'm going to sit on that, and that's going to be my retirement vehicle. And as a real estate counselor, I always tell people, why don't we look at other options too? It's not just for buying another condo. You can buy, say, a strip mall in Texas. You can go anywhere in the USA and diversify.
That's a good point.
Grow your asset basis.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people think about when they have investment, especially if they're going to think of real estate, they're thinking here locally. They don't realize that their dollar could actually go a little bit farther someplace else in the country and do some other things that might generate additional cash flow.
Absolutely. You know, and one of the rules is it's like for like. So real estate for real estate, we talk about leverage and cash flow and all these fancy words, but you know, it is important. You do want to leverage your investments and you do want to make them grow. And sometimes it's for just headaches. You know, if you had let's say you did own 2 condos or 2 homes somewhere and they were just a maintenance nightmare and you wanted to switch that out for a small strip mall or apartment building somewhere. You know, those things are designed more so to make money than a home or a condo would be. So it's always a good idea to look in other areas, other types of investments. Sometimes people own land and you want to increase your cash flow. You know, land doesn't bring in much cash flow unless you're renting it out to somebody with horses or something, something like that. But you could sell the land and then go buy an apartment building, which would really increase your cash flow.
Now, if someone wants to do one of these 1031 exchanges, is it a normal transaction as any other real estate transaction?
It's very similar. You have to have what we call a 1031 intermediary or counselor. They have transaction departments. Through most of the title companies have them. and it's a neutral third party. You have to, what we call, identify or not, I guess disclose that disclose that it is going to be a 1031 exchange. And there's a few rules, but they're pretty simple. So the neutral third party gives you all the paperwork you're going to need for the government. You fill all that out, you sign it, and you go along with your transaction. There's a few rules. You know, you need to identify at least 3 properties within 45 days, and then you have either 180 days or 6 months to close that transaction. But what a lot of people don't know is you could also use the entire time when you're until your tax returns are due, including extensions. So, everybody, need some water. So it could go over that 6 months period, and a lot of people don't know. So there's plenty of time to identify your future investment properties.
Is this only something that you can do if you've got a lot of excess cash? Is this only for the rich?
No, I wouldn't say so. Most people, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of people, like locally in Santa Clarita, at some point they've purchased a rental property, and sometimes it's frustrating for me because they don't do anything with it. You know, okay, you make $100 or $2 a month, and you know, hey, why don't we go ahead and exchange that for something bigger, something better, something that's going to make you more money, so you can really have a good retirement vehicle.
Bye, Dave.
See you, buddy.
I apologize, Mike. I don't mean to.
No, that's fine. This
Yeah,
happened last week too.
I'm still getting over something.
Poor guy.
Erica,
So
you can
anyways.
send the check to Tammy Edwards at
Yeah,
She hasn't changed, huh?
Nope.
there you go.
Can I, if I have a rental property and I've got a lot of equity in it, and I want to sell it here in California and buy 2 pieces of property, can I do that, or can I only exchange it for 1?
No, yeah, you can mix and match, let's say. So as long as it's real estate for real estate, you can buy 3 properties. So it's not a bad.
And so when we're saying defer taxes, does that mean that would I have to, eventually, would that catch up with me and I have to pay the taxes on that?
Yeah, eventually, someday. Or you can leave it in a trust, leave it to your family, whatever. But getting the cash flow now is what I would consider what it's all about. Or at retirement age, to have maybe your debt paid off with that investment vehicle, you know, having like a monthly ATM machine for you. So the idea is always play the game, you know, go bigger, go better, you know, and try to diversify as much as possible.
So this just goes beyond just buying another property and renting it out and creating a cash flow. You're actually trying to create, you're going another step with your tax situation, and this is actually going to benefit the government long term anyway, isn't
Well,
it?
yeah, that's what I mean. It's kind of like when you're playing craps in Vegas and you put another chip on the line with the dealers. That's kind of how I think the IRS is with they're willing to play the game with you, which I really like. And you know, and like I did with one of my condos in Washington, I sold that, bought a single-family home in Texas. That single-family home in Texas went into a triplex in Texas, and now I'm working to get that into an apartment building in a different state.
How easy
So it
is
just
that?
grows and grows and
Or
grows.
hard is that to find property across the country? If we're sitting here in Santa Clarita and we're wanting to look into, you know, what's going to be the best place for maybe this money that I might have.
Well, there's tons of blogs and articles. There's somebody, you know, they should talk to somebody like me. I have, you know, friends all over the country that are real estate agents. You just kind of watch, and you know, you watch the news and you watch the Wall Street Journal. You see what companies are, what states and cities are appreciating and not depreciating, and kind of use your brain and find out, hey, what other parts of the country are going to eventually be a hot spot. You know, like we called Austin 20 years ago. Now Austin's been crazy, and I've made a lot of money in Austin as well as Dallas. We knew, like in Phoenix, we did some 1031 exchanges in Phoenix and Vegas as well, and we were able to flip them in time and put that into a more safe, stable investment.
So obviously they can call you.
Yeah, no,
A good
absolutely.
realtor will have those contacts and know how to take care of you.
And more importantly too, is a good CPA that you can sit down with and really understand the rules. I mean, you can Google it and find out all the rules all over the place, but a good CPA will guide you down the right path as well.
Cool.
So
Very good stuff. Very interesting.
That works
Mike Bjork.
out.
Good stuff.
Thank you very
it's hard to
much.
talk about without divulging too much. You know, I don't want to get busted for that. But bottom line is 1031 exchange.
Very
But so pretty simple to do a video like that, right? And like I said, we probably made 150 grand off just that video. And Kenny, why don't you come on from First American? Give him a nice home smart welcome. So I'm sure you can tell me what was wrong and what was right about that video.
Yeah.
Now that I look at it, I'm all, uh-oh.
Yeah, do not listen to that video. No, I'm
There's a
just
couple
kidding.
of little, come on,
Yeah.
did I say that? There's
Yeah,
a couple little
no,
things.
most of it was correct. Did everyone get one of these? I didn't put them on the back row.
Do you remember
Need
which
some
one
more?
was here?
Which, I think that's mine.
Oh,
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah. Pass these out. hope I have more in the car, just in case. Yeah. But pass them down to whoever hasn't got them. If I have to go grab more, I'll go grab more. We got a good audience. You know, I want to settle in. What's up, bro? How you doing? Good to see you. Good to see you. So my name's Ken Harris. I'm with First American Exchange. I've actually been with First American for 23 plus years now. I have an escrow background. I moved over to the 1031 exchange division in 1999. So I've been doing 1031 exchanges ever since 1999. When I moved over to the exchange division, I was an exchange officer where I handled the desk as an escrow officer would, which you guys are used to. And then in 2008, I went out in the field and I do more sales rep type of work and get in front of people and let them know that we're still here, financially strong, and going as a qualified intermediary for First American. Who here has done a 1031 exchange here in the last couple of years? So we got a few people. Who knows nothing about a 1031 exchange? A couple of people there. So I'm going to go through it. I don't do a PowerPoint because I like to keep it interactive. Please ask questions as we go. And a lot of times PowerPoint people start snoring and drooling, so it's not pretty. But 1031 exchange, it's a tax shelter. Mike touched a lot on what I'm going to touch on today. It's a tax shelter that basically states property held for productive use in trade or business or as an investment property can be traded for like-kind property without the recognition of gain or loss. So what does that mean for us? You have a client that's selling a piece of property and they have to buy other piece of property that they're also going to hold for investment. In doing so, instead of paying the government, Uncle Sam, possibly up to 35% in capital gains tax, you keep that money. Let's say they have a $500,000 gain. On a $500,000 gain, let's call it a $150,000 tax consequence. Would you rather put that $150,000 towards taxes, or would you rather keep that, apply it towards more money or more property for more money in cash flow, which Mike kept touching on in there? Not only is it cash flow for your client, it's selling a property and buying multiple properties. So the idea for you guys is to get multiple transactions out of this deal. I've literally had a client sell one piece of property and buy 10 replacement properties. And on the 10 replacement properties, they handled all of those transactions. So you have a client selling one property, sometimes selling multiple properties, buying multiple properties, and you close on all of them within 6 months. So it's more cash flow for you guys too. Not only that, there is a holding period. So now in the definition that I said, they say property held for productive use and trade. So when I say held for, you have to hold the property as an investment, typically for 2 years, in order to defer your taxes. You can't flip property and benefit from 1031 exchange. So if you buy property with the intent to sell, you cannot do a 1031 exchange. If you buy property, you hold it as a rental. After 2 years, you have 2 years tax filing on that property as an investment property. You can 1031 exchange it into another piece of property. You're also going to hold for investment. So like-kind property, I mentioned in the tax code. Like-kind property basically says, as Mike said, it's real estate that was held for investment being exchanged for other real estate that's also going to be held for investment. Okay, yes?
So it cannot be a personal property, a personal residence?
It cannot be a primary residence. Go ahead.
I had a buyer, actually. We sold their stepmom's property, which is a $1 million like apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
And she gave our buyer, we ended up not working with the buyer because it was too, we didn't understand 1031 exchange. But long story short, she gave her like an obscene amount of money from that transaction, and she bought herself a personal residence. And we were thinking, oh, I didn't think you could buy a personal residence.
Yeah, you can.
Somehow she made it work.
So see, she may have made it work basically by claiming that property as an income property. So she's probably filing that on her taxes. So here's the rule with primary residence. So 1031 exchange, you have to sell investment property held for investment, and then buy other property you're also going to hold for investment. So what I'm going to touch on, I'm going to call it IRC 121. 121, anyone know what that is? The IRC 121? That everyone knows what it is, it's just they don't know the tax code. It's basically the $250,000 you're tax exempt from paying taxes as a single person when you sell your primary residence, as long as you live there and own it 2 out of the last 5 years. If you're married, you're exempt from paying taxes on your gain up to $500,000. Okay, so if you're selling your primary residence, that's what you take. You take your 121 exemption. They don't allow 1031 exchange for this. So in your situation though, they were selling a piece of investment property, right? They 1031 exchange it, they bought another piece of property they were gonna move into right away, is what they were doing, correct? She had to have claimed that on her taxes as an investment property. So you could buy a piece of property, a residential piece of property, rent it out to a family member, as long as you charge a fair market value rent. Now, if they're doing things behind the scenes and she's living there, she has to be claiming that on her taxes for 2 years at least as an investment property. If you do exchange into a piece of property as an investment, you do have the ability, and this is kind of another way you could kind of try to avoid maybe eventually paying taxes. Because as Mike was saying, it's a tax deferment. So you could buy an investment property, residential property, maybe you want to retire on that Malibu property, you buy it, you rent it out for 2 years. After 2 years, you can convert that property to your primary residence. So under the rules, under the 121 rules, you can, as long as you own it and live in it 2 out of the last 5 years, you're exempt from paying taxes on the $250,000 or the $500,000. Now 1031 exchange changes those rules. Because you exchanged into the property, you cannot sell that property for 5 years from your acquisition date. Buy it today, rent it for 2 years, convert it to your primary residence after 2 years. You cannot sell it for 5 years from today to benefit from that IRC 121. And because you exchanged into it, they're going to limit the $250,000 or $500,000. So I'm going to carry this out 10 years. Okay? You rent it out for 2, you live in it for 8. You have a total of 10 years of ownership. 20% of the time was investment due to the 1031 exchange. They will eliminate 20% from your 121 exemption. So that married couple that could typically get up to $500,000 gain, that they're exempt from paying taxes, now only get up to $400,000. Okay, so with a primary residence, with a 1031 exchange, you have to buy an investment property. You can convert it to your primary residence after a couple years. In that scenario, they had to have been claiming it on their taxes as an investment property. So that's the key. On the property being sold, how have you claimed that on your taxes? Because when you file for the 1031 exchange, and this is why they say 2 years, hold the property for 2 years as an investment. The IRS is going to go back on the previous 2 years' taxes to make sure you held that property, showed an income on that property, and showed it as an investment property. You know, you can't just randomly say, oh, I held it as an investment property. You have to have a history of that on your taxes. Okay? And then on the property you're purchasing, they're also going to follow you for 2 years. So when you say a holding period and I say 2 years, the tax code doesn't tell you 2 years. But most CPAs, the conservative approach is to hold the property for 2 years to qualify for 1031 exchange. Okay? So, you get the listing. I'm going to go through the process. You guys get the listing. You find out it's a potential 1031 exchange. How do you know it's a 1031 exchange? If you guys walk out of here with one thing today, this is what I want you to walk out of here with. Know when it's a potential 1031 exchange. What if they live in the property? And this could be the scenario in your case. What if they live in the property and you say, oh, they live here, it's not a 1031 exchange. Well, what if they rent out rooms? That's an investment property, right? Maybe they were claiming that on their taxes. What if they have a back house that they rent out? They may have to exchange the value of the back house. It's a duplex. They live in half, they rent out the other half. They may have to exchange the half. What if it's a farm? We get a lot of agriculture deals. They live on the property, but they farm the land. They could do a 1031 exchange on the land. We've done exchanges on farms, we've done exchanges on vacant land, we've done exchanges on apartments, and as Mike said, it's all interchangeable. You could sell the farm, you could go buy apartments. You could sell the apartments, you could go buy the commercial property. You could sell commercial, you could go into residential. Okay? The one thing I don't recommend, remember this is a tax deferment. So you keep deferring your taxes. Okay? I don't recommend you go from an improved property that you could depreciate into a vacant land that you cannot depreciate. Because remember, when you depreciate property and you sell that property, not only is your capital gains tax possibly up to 35%, they will tax you 25% on the depreciation you've taken if you don't do an exchange. So if you depreciated your property $100,000, there's a $25,000 tax there that is not charged if you go into another property through a 1031 exchange. So if you go from an improved property that you've been depreciating and exchange that into vacant land, which you can do and defer your capital gains tax, you're going to get taxed on the depreciation from the property, from the depreciable property, because you went into a non-depreciable property. So be careful. Going from vacant land to improved property makes sense. As Mike said, I mean, a lot of times you're not making money on vacant land. It's just sitting there. You're paying a property tax on it. It's a good selling point for you guys that have clients that own vacant land. Move on to another improved property that can make you money and hopefully get you guys a couple deals. okay? You guys get the listing. You guys recognize it's a possible 1031 exchange. Mike said a few times, call the CPA. Always get the CPA involved, okay? I'm not a CPA. I'm not allowed to give advice, just like you guys. So get the CPA involved to make sure it makes sense for them to do a 1031 exchange, okay? Here's your hardest part in the 1031 exchange. 45 days to identify and 180 days to close. These times start ticking the day you close escrow on the property you sell.
Could you repeat that?
45 days to identify and 180 days to close. Everything Mike said on his video was good, but this is the one thing I'm going to challenge him on. Actually, two things, I think.
That's not bad.
You go on a live
Exactly.
TV show.
Yeah, exactly. No, I was kidding. Mike mentioned 180 days or your tax filing deadline date with extensions.
Oh, right.
Okay, so when you have 180 days, we're approaching the end of the year right now. So when you close, I think after October 15th, your 180th day will take you beyond your tax filing deadline date of April 15th. You have to file your taxes for the exchange in the year in which you sell the property. Okay, so if I sell, say, December 1st, my 180th day may fall on June 1st. But if I have to file my taxes by April 15th, and I need the extra 45 days to close on my replacement property, it could minimize your 180-day period. So the tax extension, you file for a tax extension to get the full benefit of your 180 days. So the 180 days doesn't extend. It's just you file for a tax extension to get the full benefit of the 180 days.
Exactly what I said.
Okay? Yeah. Okay. So you close escrow. We figured out it's a 1031 exchange. You got their CPA involved. When you open escrow, I get involved, and I assign myself into the transaction. One of our main jobs, to give you a little boring history of 1031 exchange back 100 years ago, a guy, T.J. Starker was his name. He started doing the exchange, went to the government. It was land. It was trading land. So if Mike owned a piece of property, I owned a piece of property, we swapped properties. That's what 1031 exchange was. We were swapping properties. It was a two-party transaction. Well, as it progressed, what they did is they brought in the qualified intermediary, us. And if you notice, when you do a 1031 exchange, we assign ourselves into the transaction of the property being sold as seller. And then ultimately, when we go to buy property, we're assigned in as buyer. So by us doing that, we're creating that two-party transaction, First American Exchange, without going on title to the property. Okay, so we're creating that two-party transaction. You have to have a qualified intermediary to do a 1031 exchange. The only time you don't is that two-party swap transaction. And even in those scenarios, a lot of times they'll hire us to be the qualified intermediary just to dot their I's and cross their T's. Okay, because that has to happen under one escrow anyways. Okay, so you hire us, we get involved, we assign ourselves into the transaction, we close escrow. One of our main jobs too is holding on to the money. The client is not allowed to touch the funds in the 1031 exchange. So the funds come to us and we hold on to the funds to apply towards the purchase or replacement property because we're going to be the buyer on that property. Okay, so let me give you my quick little First American sales pitch. Money's coming. We can hold money up to 180 days. So coming with First American title, Billy, is going to back those funds. They're going to issue a letter that guarantees your funds with our company by a multi-billion-dollar corporation. Okay? I don't know if you guys, how long you guys been in the business, but back in 2008, this is the last one we had. Companies faltered. People were taking the money to make money on the money, putting them in auction rate securities, student loans. Well, in 2008, when everything crashed, client calls up, hey, I'm ready to close on my replacement property. And they didn't have the money. Because everyone knows what happened in 2008. So not only do they not have the money to close on the replacement property, they have to try to obtain their money back through insurances. They lose the ability to do the 1031 exchange because they did not close on replacement property within 180 days. So coming with First American, there's a lot of good companies out there, but by coming with First American, your funds are backed by First American Title. We have a $20 million fidelity bond, $20 million errors and omissions insurance. We also open up separate accounts for every client, which gives them the FDIC insurance on the transaction too. Okay, I'm done with my sales pitch. Had to give my First American Title butt over here a little bit.
That's important.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so it's the financials. Because you guys, I'll tell you right now, if you guys are fee shopping, we're not the cheapest. Here's my fee. It's $1,000 to do a 1031 exchange for any property sold under 1 million. Between 1 million and 5 million, $1,500. Anything over 5 million, $2,000. Okay? These clients are usually saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. So where are you going to put your money to save a couple $100s? You're going to put it with a company that secures the funds. Who are you going to refer? A company that is going to have secure funds and be ready to close on a replacement property when they're ready.
Is that per site?
No, it's okay. So the fee is collected at the close of escrow of the property being sold. No additional fee when you close on your first purchase. So if you sell one and buy one, then it's a flat $1,000 fee if the sale was under $1 million. Okay, we will charge $250 at each additional purchase. Okay, and that's only if you're buying multiple. Okay, so we close escrow, we get the money, we guarantee the funds. 45 days you must identify. This is the hardest part for you guys. Finding the replacement property within the 45-day identification period. Let's rewind to when you're accepting the offer on the listed property. Think about your closing date. Closing date triggers your 45-day deadline to identify. Okay, I have a lot of agents that'll put in the purchase agreement an option to extend the close of escrow. Because if they're looking for replacement property and the actual close of escrow date is coming up and they don't feel comfortable they could still find replacement property, they could extend the close of escrow. I know it's difficult. I know you have buyers, they have rate locks, they have all that they need to follow. It's difficult, but if you negotiate that up front, maybe it could work. Buy yourself more time by extending the close of escrow. Or don't do the 30-day escrow. Maybe do the 45-day escrow or the 90-day escrow or 60-day escrow. Because you want to find replacement property for your client within the 45 days. You close today, you have 45 days to identify. If you don't know what you're buying yet, 45 days goes by like that. Okay? 45. I have day 45, people come in, they don't want to pay anything to the government, so they identify properties. They don't know if they could get the properties. Right? Day 46, they call me up, hey, I put an offer on all my identified properties. I can't get them, they were purchased by somebody else. They have a failed exchange. Okay? You cannot extend your identification period. So, we want to start looking for replacement property prior to closing the sale even. You could be in escrow on a property you're purchasing prior to closing your sale. You just want to coordinate your closing dates to close first on the sale so the money could roll out of it and then roll into the purchase of the replacement property. And I'll touch on reverse exchange in the end. What do I got till 12?
As much time as you need.
Okay. I'll touch on replacement property or reverse exchange in the end. So, sell first, buy second, worry about your time deadlines. 45 days to identify, 180 days to close. Okay? Once you identify, you have the additional 135. So it's not 45 plus 180. They both start the day you close escrow on the property you sell. So close today, 45 days from today we must identify, 180 days from today we must close. Okay? Open up your brochures. Page 3. If you look at, actually they changed this on me, hold on. Actually it is page 3. These are the important things. Identification period, exchange period, fully deferred exchanges.
We don't have page 3.
Yeah. Got it? The third page. I shouldn't say page 3. Yeah. So identification period, that's what I was just talking about. You have 45 days to identify. Exchange period, that's 180 days you have to close. Fully deferred exchanges. In order to defer all of your taxes in the transaction, you have to buy property of equal or greater value and of equal or greater equities to what you sell. So you sell for $1 million, you say you have $600,000 equity coming out of the property. You want to buy other property or properties for at least $1 million using that $600,000 equity. The other $400,000, there's a misconception out there, I get this all the time, I have to exchange the equal amount of debt I had on the property being sold. That's not true. But how are you going to make up the other $400,000 that you don't have? You could get additional debt on the acquisition property or properties, or you could bring in cash into the deal. So cash will offset debt. You don't necessarily have to have the equal loan amount, but typically you do if you're going to buy of equal or greater value. Or you may have a greater loan amount if you buy of equal or greater value. It does not destroy your transaction to buy of lesser value. So if you sell for $1 million and buy for $900,000, you could still defer your taxes, but you may have a tax consequence on the $100,000 trade down. So you could benefit, but you may have a tax consequence. I said equal or greater equity. Client, they say, I want $100,000 in my pocket. We could exclude ourselves prior to the close of escrow, the property being sold from $100,000 value. At the close of escrow, the property sell, we'll get the $500,000 equity. They'll receive the other $100,000 equity that they'll pay a tax on. So we could exclude it if they want cash in their pocket. But a lot of times they have bills. I got to pay off credit cards. I got to buy a new car. I want to take a trip around the world. If they're willing to pay a tax on it, we could exclude ourselves from a value. Yes.
The tax on that, is it the 35%?
It would be the 35%, but it's a prorated amount, so if it's a small amount, you know, a lot of times your commissions, your escrow fees, your title fees will offset a tax consequence. You know, so it's not that big of a deal. A lot of times it might be $10,000, and they still don't have a tax consequence because of the fees and costs in the transaction. So it could be 35%, but it's a prorated amount based off of what your gain is on the transaction. Okay. Everyone understand what basis is on a transaction? Your basis is your original purchase price plus capital improvements on the property minus depreciation on the property. Okay. So if you figure up this number, I buy a property for $500,000. I add $50,000 of improvements to it. My basis jumps from $500,000, my original purchase price, to $550,000 plus the capital improvements, minus depreciation taken on the property. Let's say I've depreciated the property $50,000. Okay, my basis drops down to $500,000. I'm now selling my property for $1 million. Okay, if I sell my property for $1 million, what's my gain? The difference between my sales price and my basis, the $500,000 difference. Okay, so when I go buy another piece of property in a 1031 exchange, here's your tax deferment. If I go buy another piece of property for $1 million to meet my equal or greater value, what is my basis in the property? It's $500,000 because I carried that gain from the original property to the new property. So if I sell this property, now if I sell this property for $1.5 million, I'm not going to bring in capital improvements and depreciation on this property. What's my gain on the property? So I gained $500,000 on the new property, but I carried over the $500,000 gain on the old property. So now I have a $1 million gain on the transaction.
Is that less closing costs?
Yeah, less closing costs. So closing costs will always help on the basis and paying your taxes. But on $1 million gain, you know, you got to figure you're gonna have a $300,000 tax consequence. You know, and I've been saying 35% on the gain. You know, your Fed rate right now starts at 15%. If your income levels jump up to $400,000 if you're single, $450,000 if you're married, it's an additional 5% for the Feds. Okay, so that's 20%. It's an aggregate income too. So if I have the scenario I just gave you, and let's say I do not earn a dime on my job this year, and I think my income is zero, but I sell that $1 million property with a $500,000 gain, what's my income? It's $500,000 because of the gain on the property. Okay, so if I have a $500,000 gain and I earn $200,000 at my job, I have a $700,000 income level. So your clients will jump up to the higher tax rates based off of that. So a lot of people are like, oh no, we won't touch the $400,000 income. You have a 12.3% on the state of California capital gain tax rate. You have a 3.8 Medicare tax that's applied towards capital gains when your income levels are $200,000 if you're single, $250,000 if you're married, again, an aggregate income. You have the 25% tax on the depreciation taken on the property. So those are your tax rates basically that your clients are looking at, and always have their CPA run the numbers on what their tax consequence would be, especially if they're going to take boot or buy of lesser value. Okay, I get the client that sells for $2.3 million. They're going to pay off all their debt and closing costs. They're going to come out with $600,000, and they want to buy something for $600,000 because they don't want to leverage the next property. It doesn't make sense to do an exchange at this point because the tax savings is not going to be enough based on the trade down of 1.5 million. Okay, so let's always talk it through on each transaction. So when you get the listing appointment, you know it's a 1031 exchange, get me involved, get me a meeting, get me on a conference call so we can talk through the transaction. Okay, the rules to identify: 3 property rule, 200% rule, 95% rule. You have under the 3 property rule, this is the most common rule. Mike touched on it on his video. 3 property rule, most common rule to identify on. It says you could identify 1, 2, or 3 properties at any value. Of course you want to meet the equal or greater value. Okay, you sell for $1 million, you could identify 3 $1 million properties. And then choose from those 3 properties if you're only buying 1. You could identify a $500,000 property and 2 $250,000 properties to hope to close on all 3 to meet your $1 million value. So you could buy multiple properties to meet your value of equal or greater value. Okay? You could close on 2 of the 3 if you want. It depends. A lot of times people identify 1, that's the only one they're closing on, and they close on the one, they're done. Your ideal exchange would be close today on the property you're selling, close tomorrow on the property you're purchasing. Then you don't have to worry about your 45-day identification period. So if you can do that, you identify the 1 property, you're done with your exchange. If you buy it equal or greater value and use all the equity. Okay? 200% rule. I gave you guys an example earlier. I had a guy sell 1 property, bought 10 replacement properties. What he had to do is identify under what's called the 200% rule. So what the 200% rule, the IRS gives us this tax shelter. It's fine, it's dandy, it's great. But they want some people to fail and pay their taxes. Otherwise, why give you the 45 days to identify? Why can't I just identify the entire state of California and then choose from properties there? They limit what you could identify. So if you're going to identify more than 3, they say fine, you have to identify it under what's called the 200% rule. You can identify any number of properties, 4 or more, because if you're doing 3 or less, you're on the 3 property rule, as long as the total combined fair market value of everything you identified does not exceed 2 times the value of the property you sold. Okay, so if I sell for $1 million, actually I'm going to give you the example where my client bought 10. Sold for $2.5 million. They were going from commercial property, they wanted to get back into residential property. They identified a bunch of residential property. They could identify as much up to $5 million, not to exceed $5 million. So if you're buying, in Bakersfield, $300,000 residential properties, you could identify a ton of properties up to $5 million and then choose. But you want to meet your equal or greater value to the $2.5 million. So remember, identification does not mean you have to close on it. It might mean just it's a backup in case this property doesn't work. If I identify 3 properties, I plan on buying 1, I try to put an offer on property 1 and that one falls out, now I have property 2 to fall back on, especially if it's past the 45 days. Property 2 doesn't work, I have property 3 to back up on. Okay, so it gives you options, especially if you're putting offers on after day 45. Okay, everyone understand the 200% rule? Equal or not to exceed 200%, 2 times the value of the property you sold. 95% rule, I'm going to touch on it. It's only happened a couple times since I've been doing exchanges, but I'm going to bring it up. So you don't fall within the 3 property rule, you're identifying 4 or more. And your identifications exceed 200%. So under that, basically I'm going to use this example. You sell for $1 million, you identify 10 $1 million properties. If you identify 10 $1 million properties and you only close on 9, then you acquire 90% of the aggregate value of what you identified, which means you destroy your entire exchange. Those other 9 properties mean nothing. So the only time I see these done is on a portfolio closing, where it's all or nothing. They're closing on 20 properties, 1 purchase agreement, 1 seller, 1 buyer, it's all or nothing anyways. So usually I don't bring this up to the clients because it's very rare it's used. And if 1 doesn't happen, usually it destroys the entire exchange. So most of our focus will be 3 property rule and 200% rule. Okay? Any questions up to this point?
Lots.
Lots?
So for your 3 property rule, that you identify 3 properties. So let's say that you're coming up to your 45 days. Is an offer on a property considered your identify? Like, do you have to show that you've written an offer?
Nope. All you need to do is when we close escrow, we're going to provide you with an identification form. All you need to do is submit that form back describing the property or properties by 11:59 p.m. of the 45th day. No offer needs to be submitted.
Perfect.
Okay, so you can submit an identification, but you want an offer because you want to feel comfortable that you could get these properties. Okay, so 45 days you must identify. Does not have to be an escrow or contract. Okay. Any other questions up to this point? Because I'm going to get into more complicated issues.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to bring up seller carryback financing in 1031 exchange. They mix like oil and water. Okay? If you're structuring a 1031 exchange, what have I said multiple times today? You're buying property of equal or greater value and equal or greater equity. If you're giving seller carryback financing, where is the money coming from for the buyer's loan? It's coming from the seller's equity, right? So now, if the equity is in the form of a note, how do you take that equity and roll it to the acquisition of replacement property? This is why you got to be careful in structuring a purchase agreement with a 1031 exchange and seller carryback financing. It's rare, but just know in your mind, if this is going on, get me involved, okay? Because there's a couple ways around it. One is, let's say it's a $50,000 loan, seller carryback financing. If the seller has $50,000 out of pocket, they could bring it into the deal, act as a lender with their out-of-pocket funds instead of the equity from the sale. This way, all the equity could roll into the exchange to apply towards the purchase or replacement property. Okay? They can remove the note from the exchange and call it boot. Remember I said if the client wants $100,000, you can put $100,000 in your pocket? Well, you could do that with the note too. So on the note, you could exclude it from the exchange, the $50,000. You receive the principal balance, or you receive the payments, and you would just pay a tax on the note as you receive the principal balance payments. Okay, so you know a seller carryback finance is kind of a tax deferment in itself. So in a seller carryback financing, if I do a $50,000 note, interest only for 5 years, I don't pay my capital gains tax on that $50,000 until I receive it 5 years from today. So that's kind of a tax deferment itself. Okay, so just be careful in structuring that. There's also circumstances where it may come into the exchange and we collect the payments and then try to get the cash from the client prior to closing the replacement property. Or I've even seen the seller of the replacement property take the note as payment towards the purchase price. So that's very rare though. So just know it's a complicated transaction if you're doing seller carryback financing. Okay? Let me give you, we already talked about principal residence situations. I've had clients call me, I'm gonna go in the reverse order of what you kind of asked. I talked about exchanging into a property, converting to your primary residence. Under that 121 exemption they give us, you know, I get the client that calls me in Beverly Hills. They've owned the property since 1968. They bought it for $500,000. Now they're selling it for $8.5 million. They've lived in the property the entire time, okay? If you're having an $8 million gain, $500,000 doesn't help you too much, right? Or $250,000. So I see clients, and I know you guys don't totally like this because it pushes back closings, but I've seen clients move out of the property, rent it out. You rent it out for 2 years, you qualify it for 1031 exchange. Now they sell this property, right? It now qualifies for 1031 exchange and the IRC 121 exemption. Because under the 121 exemption, all you have to do is live in it and own it 2 out of the last 5 years. So now they could take their money, pocket $500,000, and do a 1031 exchange. Let's say they sell it for $8 million. They could do a 1031 exchange on the $7.5 million value and go buy other property. Okay, so it's possible to mix 1031 and 121. Okay, and both ways. All right. Everyone good?
Is it, if they did that gain at 7 million or whatever, we just did one that half of that was put in a charitable family trust where the daughter bought the new property with them to avoid the gain on that half. It didn't seem all.
Okay, so this is actually a good thing. So when you do an exchange, there's a same taxpayer requirement. So did they do an exchange, or was it the charitable trust that would allow them to?
But they didn't want to pay the gain on the other half, so they put that into the charitable family trust. That trust then bought the rest of the property with them, and they avoided the gain on all the rest of it, the other half.
That's interesting.
It was awesome.
Yeah.
I don't know if they're going to jail for it or not.
That's where that's where the CPA comes in.
Yeah.
I don't know how they qualified that, to be honest, because why wouldn't they just do an exchange on the entire thing? Because so they took money, they split up the exchange, and you could do
They
this.
didn't want the future taxes, the burden to be on the family
Okay.
through the estate.
Okay. So this takes me to the tax deferment, which you touched on in the video too. So you exchange. A lot of my clients' plan is, and I'm not sure how the charitable trust comes in. And I think when you say charitable, that somehow makes it tax-free or tax deferred.
Right, exactly.
is obviously what it is. So in the tax deferment, in my example where he sold for $1 million, you get a $500,000 gain, then you sell for $1.5 million, now it's $1 million gain because you carried over the original gain. So you keep doing this. And most of my clients plan on exchanging forever until they die. All right, because if you exchange 5 times, now you're gonna pay taxes on the gain from the 5 properties, okay? But if I own a piece of property in my trust and my gain is $5 million today, if I die tonight, my kids can inherit my property tomorrow, my basis jumps up $5 million. My kids could sell my property at 0 capital gains consequence through the step up in basis through the death. So that's all of my clients' plans is exchange forever till they die. Most people don't want to depend on their Social Security or their pensions or whatever their retirement plan is. They want that income coming in. Okay? But if what I don't understand on this, and this is where the CPAs and attorneys probably come in, in his scenario, they did a split exchange. Mike and I own a piece of property together, 50%, right? Tenant in common interest. I could do a 1031 exchange. Mike can sell the same property and pay his taxes on his portion of the transaction. Okay, so this kind of sounds like it was split. You took your part, put it into a charitable trust. I did a 1031 exchange, but then the charitable trust jumped into the same acquisition or replacement property. So the only thing I could think of, and this is where the CPAs and attorneys would come in, is that wasn't a tax deferment. It's a tax-free thing being through the charitable thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
That's
maybe
interesting.
even worse, the parents lived in the house and legitimately had rental paperwork for the daughter for the 2 years and turned it into the exchangeable property.
Okay.
Which was super smart. I mean,
Yeah.
The whole thing was just beautiful.
Yeah, you get that. You get people that own it. Here's the thing. You have to claim this on your taxes, right? As an investment property. So I get the clients that call me, they were smart, but I get the client that call me, I bought a condo by the college where my kid is going to college, they graduated now, I want to exchange out of it. They never charge their kid rent, nor that they never claim that on their taxes as an investment property. You cannot exchange a second home. Okay, so you want to claim this on your taxes as an investment property, which is what they did, even though they were kind of living there. So now the IRS, you're going to file it for an exchange, but the IRS probably isn't going to question it because there's a history of tax returns on there as an investment property and income. Okay, some people think they're smart by, I'm going to not tell the IRS about my income so I don't have to get taxed on it, and then all of a sudden they want to exchange, but there's no history of it, now they have to pay the capital gain consequence. Okay, so be careful. I get the client that calls me, my mom was sick, we knew she was dying a week before she died, we deeded the property to me. Don't do that. Be careful. Get CPAs and attorneys involved again. Guess what happened when they deeded the property before the death? That person inherited her basis. If they waited a week later, he inherited through the death, they get step up in basis. So they thought it'd be simpler to deed the property before the death. So be careful on what people are doing. It might make sense, but maybe it doesn't. That's why we always refer them to their CPA. Okay? So it's a tax deferment, hopefully forever. Get the step up in basis. Okay? Now let me touch on reverse exchange real quick. Everything I've talked about is a straightforward exchange, delayed exchange, you might hear it as. Reverse exchange. In a reverse exchange, it's a much more expensive transaction, but it's a great tool to use. Usually you're going to spend an extra $10,000 on a reverse exchange. Our fee is going to be $7,500. There's going to be LLC tax for the state. There's going to be additional transaction because we buy the property, then we sell the property back. So there's additional recording fees, there's additional document transfer tax. Here's what it is. When you find a property, I keep telling you guys, be careful on your 45 days. You want to be in escrow on a property you're selling or buying maybe prior to closing your sale. What if your client finds a piece of property they love, they're going to make a ton of cash on it, they want to buy it through a 1031 exchange, but the property they're selling hasn't closed yet. They want to buy this property as part of an exchange. They can't just buy the property today because you cannot exchange into property you already own. So if they bought the property in their name, then they've disqualified that property as a replacement property for when they could sell their relinquished property. So what happens in a reverse exchange is I come in, my company comes in, we create an LLC to come in and buy this property on behalf of the client. So now I create ABC LLC, First American Exchange is the member of it. We go buy 123 Main Street, waiting for the client to sell. So really, it's a preservation of a replacement property for when they could sell the property for the 1031 exchange. So here's the obstacles in this. We create an LLC. Where are we coming up with the money to buy the property? The equity of the sale is not available. Do they have cash funds to buy it? Or do they need a third-party lender with a mix of cash funds to buy it? If the third-party lender, you're with Skyline? If the third-party lender is going to lend to it, will you lend to my LLC as a non-recourse loan like we require? No. So you have to be careful. On a residential property, usually they have to have cash funds to buy the property. So what's happening is they're the lender to us. So they give me cash. And if you have commercial property lenders will lend to our LLC as a non-recourse loan like we require. But on a residential property, they lend the money to ABC LLC to buy the property. So now I have a promissory note saying I owe you $500,000 that you let me borrow to buy this property. Once we park this property, we close escrow today. ABC LLC owns it. I lease it back to the client. They have full control of this property. So they could rent it out, they could make money off of it. They could get in there and do the repairs or whatever they got to do. So it may cost $10,000 more, but now maybe they're making money sooner. Remember, if you sell a property today and then you don't close on your replacement property for 6 months, that's 6 months with no rental income, right? So maybe having the property today, make money off of the property today, and you don't sell the property for 4 months, maybe you're making money on 2 properties for 4 months instead of not making any money on either property for 4 months. So it's a great tool to have, even though it's more expensive. So we buy the property. 45 days from today, you have to identify what property you're selling. My bigger clients love this because it eliminates the 45-day identification of the replacement property. They always know what they're selling. So it's not a big deal. We park the property, 45 days they have to identify, 180 days. So these time frames are just reversed. Within 180 days, you have to close not only on the property they're selling, but also close back on the acquisition of the property that we now own through the reverse exchange. We have to transfer that property back to them. The equity of the sale rolls out of the exchange, as it normally does, into the qualified intermediary, rolls into the purchase of the replacement property, which rolls into the seller's hands, right? But under the seller's hands, there's a payoff of the note, which is what we originally borrowed from the client. So they could get the equity of their sale back through the payoff of the note on the purchase of the replacement property. Everyone understand that? Okay. Good, because there's a quiz coming up too. So it's possible. It's possible to close on replacement property prior to closing on the relinquished property and still preserve it. But that's a reverse exchange. It's more expensive. Again, get me involved right away so we can talk it through and see if it's even possible. Okay? There's a scenario like that too. I keep saying equal or greater value. I've had scenarios where we do that. We buy a property, we park it because they know that we're selling for $2 million. They're buying the property for $1.5 million. They're trading down in value $500,000, right? But they know they have $500,000 value of improvements they need to put into the property. Well, if you buy the property at $1.5 million, you trade it into the value of the property the day you acquire the property. So what we do is we buy the property like we do in the reverse exchange, lease it back to them. If they can improve $500,000 by 180 days of the first closing, you can include the improvements as part of the exchange. So there's different scenarios, there's different things we could do to help your clients defer their taxes and hopefully make more money for you guys too.
Sorry guys, it's being recorded.
Yeah. Okay, so I've given you guys a ton of information, obviously. I don't expect you guys to remember it all.
What?
What's your name again?
Yeah, exactly. There's 2 things I want you to remember. Recognize it's a possible 1031 exchange. Even if it's not, and you think it 1% maybe could be, call me. Okay? So try to recognize when it's a possible 1031 exchange and give me a call. And the second thing you got to remember is me. Just give me a call. Okay? That's pretty much it.
You're the
All
man.
right?
So a lot of information, right? But do you see how you can create a lot more sales with this type of knowledge? You start getting creative, you start doing blog posting, you start doing Facebook posts, you start actually learning this stuff. Dude, it takes your career to a whole new level. Like, you can hear me talking about some of the transactions, and him and I have had some crazy transactions in the past, but you can put them together and make some really, really big commissions. Some of this stuff doesn't apply to our market, like you were talking about, the seller financing and stuff like that. The seller financing today, no. When I got in the business, when interest rate, my first house was 13% interest rate. The guy that I bought the house from, it was 22%. I mean, things that some of us can't even fathom, but it's real. So when we do the seller financing, we'd have the seller finance huge chunks of money. And then this got complicated. And that's how I was forced to learn all this stuff. Today we're in this really cool market and we don't need to know nothing. We just go out with a little lockbox key and start selling properties. Back in the day, you needed to put things together and be very creative. We were talking about AITVs and land contracts and all kinds of different stuff. And you remember this?
Yeah, I do. Don't be scared. Don't be scared of a 1031 exchange. I've literally had agents say, "Oh, if it's 1031 exchange, I give it to the next guy."
Yeah.
That's what you have me for. Make more money.
Yeah,
you
it's
know?
like the agents that go, I don't want to do a short sale, I give this away. I don't want to do REO, I give this away. I don't want to do this, I give it away. But this, it's so much money and it's so easy. When you have a team like this and First American with Billy on your side, it's super simple.